What happens when a music legend walks onto a daytime talk show expecting a pleasant chat about his career, only to face a sudden shift in tone that no one saw coming? The studio lights were bright, the audience full of excitement, and everything seemed perfectly normal as Elton John arrived at the Loose Women's studio that morning. He had been in good spirits all week, promoting his latest project, and the show's producers had promised a friendly, respectful conversation. Nothing about the atmosphere suggested conflict, not yet. The audience greeted him with warm applause as he stepped onto the stage. He smiled, waving softly as he took his seat among the panel. Denise Welch sat in the center, flanked by Ruth Langsford, Janet Street Porter, and Colleen Nolan. At first glance, everything looked smooth. Denise welcomed him with a smile that seemed polite, though there was something unreadable behind her eyes. "Please sit down. We're thrilled you could spare us some time from your busy schedule," she said. The word spare hung in the air in a strange way, but Elton brushed it off. The interview began pleasantly. Ruth asked about his recent charity work, and Elton spoke warmly, describing the emotional importance of using fame for good. The audience listened closely, even nodding, and Janet followed with a question about songwriting and inspiration. Elton opened up, telling stories that made the room laugh and lean in with genuine interest. For about 15 minutes, the interview was exactly as promised: light, warm, respectful. There was no tension yet. Everyone was comfortable. The conversation had flow and rhythm. Elton looked relaxed. The panel seemed engaged, but Denise had been quiet through most of it, watching, waiting, and then, without warning, she leaned forward, interrupting the smoothness of the moment like a blade cutting through still water. "Let's talk about something real, shall we?" She began, her tone noticeably different from before. The room's energy shifted, almost imperceptibly at first. "You've had quite the long career. Obviously," she continued, "but don't you think it's some point you should step aside and let younger artists have their moment?" The room fell silent. The smiles froze. Ruth and Colleen exchanged an uneasy glance. Janet paused, unsure whether to speak. Elton blinked, confusion flickering momentarily before he responded as calmly as he could. "I'm not sure what you mean by that," he said evenly. But the temperature in the studio had already dropped. Something had begun, something no one had expected. The silence that followed Denise's question hung heavily in the air, settling over the studio like a dense fog. The audience shifted uncomfortably in their seats, unsure whether they had just witnessed a harmless remark or the first crack in the atmosphere. Elton took a slow breath before responding, still maintaining his calm demeanor. "I continue to make music and perform because I love what I do," he said. "It's never been about staying relevant or competing with younger artists. Music is something that lives with you for your whole life. Age doesn't determine passion." But Denise wasn't satisfied. A thin, sharp smile crossed her face, and she leaned back in her chair as if preparing for her next strike. "Right, but love or not, there's a point where it starts to look a little desperate, isn't there?" she said lightly, though the tone was unmistakably pointed. "I mean, your fans are mostly older now. The new generation isn't exactly lining up to buy Elton John albums. Don't you think you're holding on to the spotlight a bit too tightly?" A few gasps could be heard. Even Janet, who was rarely fazed, blinked slowly and looked away, clearly uncomfortable. Ruth reached out slightly, as if wanting to intervene, but stopped herself when she saw Elton straighten his posture. This time, he didn't smile. "This is not about clinging to anything," Elton said, his voice measured but firm. "This is about continuing to do what I love. I didn't come here expecting to justify my existence." Denise laughed softly, but there was no humor in the sound. "Oh, come on. It's just an honest question. No need to get emotional," she replied, in that particular tone people use when they want to provoke rather than communicate. The atmosphere now felt tight, tense, charged with something no one could ignore. The audience members glanced at each other, some with raised eyebrows, others with visible frowns. Colleen shifted in her seat, finally stepping in. "I think what Elton is saying is valid," she said carefully. "Art doesn't have an expiration date." But Denise brushed her off. "We're not here to flatter him," she retorted. "We're here to have real conversations. And the reality is, artists who don't know when to step down often look foolish. I'm just saying what people think." Elton's eyes narrowed slightly, the first visible sign of frustration. His hands rested more stiffly on the chair. He opened his mouth to respond. This time, more direct, more cutting, when the audience began to murmur again, sensing the escalation. The tone of the room had changed completely. There was no going back now. The tension in the room had become impossible to ignore. The energy, once warm and welcoming, now felt sharp-edged and uncomfortable. Even the cameras seemed to hesitate, as though unsure where to focus. Elton leaned forward slightly, his voice lower and steadier than before. There's a difference between honest conversation and being deliberately disrespectful, he said. I didn't come here to be insulted. Denise didn't flinch. In fact, she leaned closer, as though the conflict fueled her. Oh, please, she said, waving him off. Every celebrity says the same thing the moment they're asked something that isn't praise. You're acting like no one is allowed to challenge you. Ruth finally intervened, her voice controlled but firm. Denise, that's not fair. No one is suggesting we can't ask serious questions. But tone matters. Respect matters. For a moment, there was a flicker in Denise's expression, annoyance, frustration, maybe even fear, but it vanished quickly. She turned back to Elton, her voice growing colder. Let's talk about this charity work you constantly promote. Every time you're on television, it's the same speech about your foundation, your goodness, your impact. Doesn't it ever occur to you that it looks like a publicity campaign? Something to make yourself look relevant? Something to remind people you're still here? That was it. The audience reacted instantly. Gasps, shaking, heads, disbelief. A woman in the third row muttered, "That's cruel," loud enough for others to hear. Elton's face changed. His jaw tightened. His eyes, once warm and welcoming, took on a cooler, clearer focus. He sat up straighter, as though standing his ground without actually rising from his seat. My charity work exists because it matters, he said, his voice now resonating with a quiet strength. It has saved lives. It has brought awareness to issues people ignore. And to suggest that I do it for applause is insulting to the people I've worked with and the communities that rely on support. Denise smirked, but the confidence behind the expression was fading. Janet spoke up then, trying to salvage what was left of the show's dignity. We should move forward. This line of conversation isn't constructive, but Denise wouldn't release it. No, we're having a real conversation. This is what this show is meant to be. If he can't handle honesty, then maybe he shouldn't be here. The audience didn't clap. They didn't agree. They sat in a stunned hush. Something inside Elton shifted. He was finished being polite. Elton slowly removed his microphone earpiece. The room fell into a silence, so heavy it felt physical. No one moved. The cameras kept rolling, but the energy was no longer that of a talk show. This had become something far more personal, far more real. I came here to speak with dignity, he said, his tone calm, but firm enough that no one dared interrupt him. I have dealt with criticism my entire life. I have faced worse than raised voices or rumors. But I will not sit in a room where I'm treated as though my work, my efforts, and the people I support are nothing more than performance. Denise stared back at him, though the defiance in her eyes was cracking now. A hand from the production team signaled from behind the camera, a silent plea to stop, to de-escalate. But it was already too late. Ruth leaned forward, resting a hand gently on Elton's arm. You don't have to continue, she whispered, her voice filled with genuine concern. We can cut to break. But Elton shook his head. This needed to be finished. Turning back toward Denise, he spoke with steady clarity. You say this show is about honesty. But honesty without respect is cruelty. You didn't ask me questions, you attacked me. You didn't challenge ideas, you tried to belittle them. And if that is what passes for conversation, then this is not a place I choose to stay. The audience exhaled all at once, as if everyone had been holding their breath. Elton stood. Denise attempted to speak, but her voice faltered. For the first time that day, there was no certainty behind her tone. You're walking out? Over this. He looked at her, not angry now, simply resolved. No, I'm walking away from disrespect. There is a difference. He placed the microphone on the small glass table in front of him. A quiet, final sound. The studio crew scrambled. 2 camera operators shifted position. The director spoke frantically into his headset. The producers whispered urgently to each other. Everyone knew the weight of what was happening. This was not something that would be edited away. This was going to make headlines. Elton walked toward the edge of the set. The audience rose to their feet, not in chaos, but in support. A spontaneous, gentle standing ovation. Not loud, not dramatic, just sincere. Denise sat frozen. Ruth watched him go, sadness in her expression. Janet quietly lowered her gaze. The atmosphere felt changed. Something important had been revealed. The studio door opened. Elton stepped out, and the show ended, not with music, but with silence.